Hi, welcome to another presentation. This presentation is called Human Genetics and Early African Geography. Here we have a map of Africa with the yellow line reference of the southern Egyptian border, and then the equator is this other yellow line here below. This information is going to be mostly concerned with the earliest human genetics and the sites where these genetics were found inside Africa, and will mostly only be about the how the haplogroups migrated from the center point and spread out across Africa, and where these sites are located at. Okay, let's get started. Earliest Y chromosome genetics. The male Y chromosome has been found and traced back to Western Central Africa, and the most recent common ancestors dated to about 338,000 years ago. DNA taken from an African American from South Carolina has genes related to the Mbo people living in Western Cameroon. Researchers can find this genetic information because there are genetically isolated communities that preserve human diversity. Therefore, there's not just one region where our ancestors could potentially be found, but several. In the picture to the right, we have of the Mbo people, and here's an Mbo king with his chiefs. Okay, the haplogroups L3M and N in the Persian Gulf. So the M and N haplogroups broke off from the L3 haplogroup. Harold says that the haplogroups of L3, M, and N dispersed out of Africa about 80,000 years ago, and with them, with both the Afro-Asiatic and Nilo-Saharan languages and mythology. So they left with the Afro-Asiatic and Nilo-Saharan mythology. This means they left with the roots of the religions that would later become Christianity and Judaism, and probably other religions as well. The previous inhabitants of the Persian Gulf that we discussed in the previous video could have been and probably were Afro-Asiatic and or Nilo-Saharan people. It's probable that these early genetics have already died out around the Persian Gulf. So just to put this in perspective, 80,000 years ago is what Harold is saying they left with the mythologies that would later become the religions that we know today. And the reason why I say that is because these Afro-Asiatic people and these Nilo-Saharan people are the peoples that these where Christianity and Judaism come from, and maybe some of the other Eastern religions as well. Okay, out of African bottlenecks. The outer Africans moved into Southwest Asia from Africa, and then they stayed there for about 3,000 to 5,000 years due to several bottleneck areas consisting of barriers that were hard to move through or go over. There they further divided into several more groups. Some of these barriers were the Caucasus Mountains to the north, the Zagros Mountains to the east, and the Indian Ocean to the south. What these bottlenecks did was create a population concentration within the so-called Fertile Crescent. The reason the Neolithic revolution and innovation took place here. So this yellow line here to the right is the area is the barrier. So you have the Caucasus Mountains to the north. Then you have the Zagros Mountains here in Iran, and then you have the Indian Ocean here to the south. So as waves of populations are leaving Africa, continuous waves, they're moving, through the strait, and then also through here through the Sinai Peninsula, and they're filling in these areas. Mesopotamia would become a highly concentrated area for humans. So they're filling in this area and staying here because it's hard for them to get through the mountains. And then, even though they already had ships, canoes, and small kinds of ships and stuff, they weren't able to navigate across large blue water areas, and they probably remained, when they traveled by sea, they probably remained close to the coast. They probably made sure the coasts were visible so they didn't get lost and stranded in the sea. Okay, mitochondria, Eve, the MSN, which is Middle Stone Age, Acheulean and Sangoan cultures. The female genetic line is coded into the haplogroups beginning with the letter L, which is found in the females that existed during mitochondria Eve's time. She is found at Homo Kabish, a Middle Stone Age site, and her bones date to about 200 to 190,000 years ago. This time coincides with the same time as the dates of the Acheulean and Sangoan cultured sites found at Maiso in east central Ethiopia and at Sai Island on the Nile River in northern Sudan. Therefore, studying the Middle Stone Age, Acheulean, and Sangoan will teach us about Eve's time and the earliest Egyptians and Nilo-Saharans, the earliest ancestors of the Egyptians and Nilo-Saharans. Eve is the equivalent to the Greek mother goddess Gaia, who is the origin of the current mythologies, and she, along with the equivalent East African god to the Greek god Pan, are called the Pan-Gaia, or the original earth god and goddess, according to the Greeks. Now, why I talk about the Greeks here is because I'm using Herod as a reference. So he mentions the Greek god and goddess. Otherwise, I would mention, we have a whole bunch of previous African gods that come before the Greek gods. And here we see at the top, we see where Sai Island is on the Nile River in the Sudan, near the Egyptian border. And then we have Maiso, Ethiopia here. You see kind of near Djibouti. And then a little bit south west from there, we have Homo Kabish, where the Eve's fossils are found. The DNA genetics of these fossils are found here at Homo Kabish. So you can kind of see a migration pattern here. If you're coming from the south from Kenya, you're moving up to Omo here, and then there people are filtering east to Maiso in Ethiopia, and they're also following down the White Nile into South Sudan and Sudan, and eventually reaching Sai Island, as far as Sai Island in the northern part of Sudan near the Egyptian border. Okay, the god Pan, goats, Adam, and Bes. I do not agree at this point to give the original East African god of earth the attributes of a goat which they gave to Pan, because goats did not even exist in East Africa this early, according to Professor Eret, who says goats originally came from the Near East into Africa sometime around 6,000 to 5,000 BCE, and Eve is dated to 190,000 years ago, so way before goats. So there was no goats in Africa. And Sai Island and the Ethiopian sites are far older than anything in Greece. The oldest Y chromosome fossils were dated to around 330,000 years ago, which we mentioned earlier. And so if we equate the first Y chromosome fossils to Adam, that's 330,000 years ago. But in Western Africa, not in East where Eve is at. And so we see that the male line is a lot older, more than 100,000 years older than the female line so far from what has been found. Okay, we must briefly mention the Egyptian earth god, right? We can't forget about him. And Adam's Egyptian equivalent and original, so Adam of the Bible's Egyptian equivalent and original as far back as we can seem to trace an accurate name is Atum or Tum, who is Ra himself. And the Egyptian god Seb is the earth god, which creates a current wonder whether Seb is a form of Ra. We also must mention that Pan looks like the god Bes. Bes is the pygmy god from the south of Egypt and is very ancient. I think even more ancient than Horus. But not 100% positive on that. Okay. Ancestor skeleton veneration. Eve's mitochondrial DNA is found at a Middle Stone Age Levalloisian industry and cultural site, and therefore both the MSA and the Levalloisian should contain evidence of the earliest original Homo sapiens sapiens religious beliefs. So what I'm saying here is if you want to study the earliest religious beliefs of the anatomical modern humans, then you want to look in the Middle Stone Age, and you want to look at these Levalloisian and Nubian industries and cultures for those beliefs. I'd like to do that, but I kind of skipped over it a little bit. But here you see a little brief, some brief information regarding it, and then I plan on doing some research on the Upper White Nile to find some of the earliest proto-Christianity beliefs. Harold says that the earliest possible reconstruction of Adam and Eve, who he says are Pan and Gaia, would be in one of these two early branches off of the haplogroup L, with the earliest evidence seen at Huerta, Ethiopia, where the ritual of defleshing the body and keeping one's ancestors' bones and venerating them was a practice that is also seen in Central Africa, all the way to South Asia and into the Sunda Sahel, which is Australia and the Pacific Islands, near and in the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so these earliest branches of the L1 that I'm talking about are L0, which moves south into South Africa, and then the L1 through the L6, which is north and is in the Sudan and spreads and moves, stays there, but then L1 branches off and moves west to the Niger River. We see later, okay, and then this belief of defleshing your ancestor's body upon death and then keeping the bones is found in Central Africa, and then spreads all the way to the Pacific Ocean with the migrations out of Africa. We see later ancestor veneration, that keeping a family member's bones on one's body, say as a necklace or close by, eventually became taboo, and therefore burials became the normal process after death. And it wasn't just because of that. Just because of that, it also had to do with the animals getting to the bodies, and they didn't want that to happen, so they buried them. Okay, Maiso, Ethiopia, and Sai Island, Sudan. The beginning of the Middle Stone Age might be contemporary with the ending of the Achillean and the Sangoan cultures found at Maiso, Ethiopia. Maiso is an Achillean with cleavers industry. This site is dated to about 212,000 years ago, and Sai Island in the Sudan, which is of the Sangoan culture, is dated to about 223,000 years ago. So contrary to what you hear about the Persian Gulf and the Sumerians, which we just did a presentation before this on the Persian Gulf, and I showed you that the earliest evidence we have dates to about 125,000 years ago. Here we see the earliest evidence in northern Nubia, close to the Egyptian border, is dating 100,000 years prior to that. So far older. So Egyptian and Sudan are far older than anything found in Sumer and the Persian Gulf. The Sangoan culture is the Middle Stone Age. So I hope I've proved my point on that, and you can dig further into it. I don't need to dig any further into it. But if you wanted to, you would look at these Sangoan and these Achillean cultures if you wanted to expand your knowledge on what were the people like before they left Africa and moved to Western Asia. The Sangoan culture is the Middle Stone Age culture from East Africa, making its way into the Sudan along the Nile. These two sites, San Island and Maiso, are important because we have a separation of two groups of people, one found in the Horn of Africa in Ethiopia that could have been a population that migrated out and across the Red Sea into the Arabian Peninsula, and one on the Nile that likely continued migrating down the Nile into Egypt. This helps us to answer the question of where did the early peoples of Egypt and in the Persian Gulf oases come from. So they come from these Sangoan Middle Stone Age and Achillean Middle Stone Age sites that are found in Ethiopia and Sudan and Egypt. L0 haplogroup, a click language or click languages. Harold says cultural interaction between the early Middle Stone Age and the Sangoan culture is evidence seen by the features in the hand axes and the collected exotic stones found at Omokabish. The original L haplogroup branches off into L0 at about 160,000 years ago and strongly correlates to the click language family of the Sandawi and the Hadza people, and then seen in the later people who moved south called the African Bushmen, or the San and the Khoikhoi. So these Sandawi and Hadza are still in Ethiopia, and then the another group of them went and moved south, and those are the Bushmen, San, and Khoikhoi. This is the branch that moved south of the original population center in East Africa, southwestern Kenya, and down into South America. You have a picture of a sun hunter here to the right. And you know what's really amazing is you can see the Asian features, right? The Asians got their features from these early. It looks like the earliest LO and maybe L1 Africans, right? The only difference is a lighter skin color. But if you look at the native Asians of South Asia, they're gonna be dark skinned too, like these. Just the hair might be a little bit different, but you can see, right? You can see like where they came from. Okay, the L1 through L6 haplogroup, so they are still together in a group. The only one that's branched off so far is the L0. Okay, the other branch at this time, at about 160,000 years ago, was the L1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, all together, still coinciding in one population group and still in East Africa. According to Herod, there are not any survivors still carrying this genetic genes alive today. So there's no one alive today that still has the combination of the L1 through L6 all together in their body. They've died off and they're gone. There's only the single branches that are still found. People like the San, Khoisan, or Hasda people would be the people closest, would be these people's closest relatives to the people who once had these early genetic haplogroup. L1 to L6 haplogroup sites are Bir Tar Fawi in the western desert of Egypt, Benzu, which is near Tangier, Morocco, and Ifra in Ammar in Morocco. And I have those here in red. So Morocco all the way here to the west. We see these two sites, Benzu and Ammar here, right near the Pillars of Hercules. And then all the way here in the Red Sea Hills in Egypt, all the way to the coast on the Red Sea, you see Bir Tafarwi here, and then down south we have Sai Island, Sudan, we can see. So these sites, they found the L1 through L6 haplogroup. They found fossils of these people here. And interesting enough, later on, the Afro-Asiatic people still migrate again across all of North Africa. So it's like a continuous for them leaving. So it's like they're having a center in Ethiopia, and the populations are continuously waves of populations. Not only are waves of populations moving across the Red Sea into the Arabian Peninsula, but waves of populations are moving north and west across North Africa. Okay. Middle Stone Age and haplogroup L1. These sites correspond to the MIS, which is Marine Isotope Stage, in the 6th period. Both Herto, Ethiopia, where Achillean tools from about 180 miles away have been found, and Sai Island in the Sudan are presumed to have interacted with early Middle Stone Age people. And I'm wondering if they interacted with Omo Kabish. These would be the click languages of the still existing gatherer hunters of today and thought to have begun about 100,000 years ago. L1 broke off next and began heading west towards northwest and central West Africa around 140,000 years ago. These are the ancestors of what would become the Niger Congo people speaking the Niger Congo language. And here I have a picture showing Niger and Nigeria with the Niger River, where these people came and migrated to. Okay, African confinement and the L1 haplogroup. These people, along with the San and Hasda people, are unique because they seem to have stayed in Africa until recently, aside from maybe mixing with the others. Compare this to the Nilo-Saharans and the Afro-Asiatic peoples who most definitely left Africa and who pretty much controlled the eastern and northern exit routes from the continent. If anyone else besides them wanted to leave in those directions, they had to pass through them first. Okay, so Africa, is all surrounded by oceans, and the only exit points are, through the straits here, through the strait down here through Djibouti to Yemen, and then through the Sinai, and then over near where Spain is at, right? Those are really the only three locations. And what I'm trying to show you here is that what I'm saying is any other groups of people besides the Nilo-Saharans and the Afro-Asiatics who lived in Africa that wanted to leave the continent would either have to go by boat and cross the oceans, or they would have to pass through the Nilo-Saharan or Afro-Asiatic people to get out of the continent. So what I have on my map, this looks like a bunch of clustered lines everywhere, but what these really are groups of Nilo-Saharan and Afro-Asiatic peoples during different time periods. So you can see that there's no way to exit. If you're over here in Central Africa, all these blue areas, blue polygon areas, are Nilo-Saharan people. And then these other ones, these black, orange, pink, red around the exterior, are all Afro-Asiatic territories. So you would have to pass through these to get out. So you can see that they were stuck, right? These are not the Nilo-Saharan are warrior people, and Africa, they're not gonna let you just pass through, right? Okay, that is why the Niger Congo and Bushman expansions are only within Africa and south. The descendants of the Nilo-Saharan Afro-Asiatic dominated the land at the exit points because they controlled all the northern and northeastern exit points by land. The L1 haplogroups is found in high percentages within the Mbinga peoples called Pygmies of the Republic of Congo and the Central African Republic, and also in the Nzibi people of Southwest Gabon, who are now Bantu speakers. The first three family branches. Therefore, now we have three large distinctive families separated, developing their own type of language. The earliest is in southern East Africa, moving towards South Africa, who are the gatherer-hunter peoples like the Khoisan, Hasda, and Sandawi. The Hasda are still in East Africa, and the Nilo-Saharan and African people who begin moving north, settling around the Nile rivers, and who are the people who left Africa. And then the last one is in the west of the L1 haplogroup, the Niger-Congo family. The remaining groups from L2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 continue to stay in East and Northeast Africa, specifically in Nubia within the Sudan. Sites where evidence of their habitation occur is at Sai Island in the northern Sudan, which has continued to be a location where people have inhabited since early in time and mentioned frequently in my research. The Nubian complex and the Levalloisian culture. The evidence is from the Middle Stone Age upper level Nubian complex with Lupemban features dated to 152,000 years ago and is equivalent to the Mis 5 period, which overlays the Sangoan culture. Other sites are in Taramsa 1, in Kina Upper Egypt, and in Koni, Ethiopia, where Nubian and Levalloisian cultures have been found dated to about 140,000 years ago. We discussed how the Nubian and Levalloisian cultures were found on the western coast of the Persian Gulf in the previous Persian Gulf video and were dated after 125,000 years ago. Therefore, everyone's ancestors were in the Sudan, Egypt, and in Ethiopia before they left Africa and moved on the Arabian Peninsula. And we can see all of these sites here on this map, which is flipped over. To the very bottom over here we have Taramsa, Egypt, on the Nile River. We can see Bir Tarfawi over here near the Red Sea. We see Sai Island, Sudan, on the Nile, but in Sudan. This is northern Nubia. And then we have, or this could be considered southern Nubia, sorry. And then we have Omo Kabish way up here to the north. And then we have Maiso, Ethiopia. And then in the far distance we have Koni, Ethiopia. So these are all the earliest sites where we would find Middle Stone Age people before they left Africa. Okay, early Nilo-Saharan and Afro-Asiatic roots. That's kind of the theme of this presentation. Humans had made it again all the way across the northern coast of Africa to Ifri Ammar in northeast Morocco. Again, right, I said there's waves, continuous waves, which is the site of the earliest Atarian culture, evidence dated to about 145,000 years ago. So all these earliest human genetics, like L0, L1, and then the rest of them, the L1 through L6, are all about, 160,000 to 140,000 years ago. And that's the date of all of these sites in Africa. Except for an exceedingly earlier site in Ethiopia is at Moda, in the rift where the culture was Middle Stone Age and mostly Levalloisian, and related to the Nubian evidence found, because of the cores found there, and according to Herod, is suggested along with Taramsa and Koni probably correspond to the Nilo-Saharan and Afro-Asiatic ancestral populations. So this is going to be important to understand because we're going to move into the Nilo-Saharan and Afro-Asiatic people, but we want to know where they came from, and it's thought that they come from these locations. Taramsa is in southern Egypt near Dendera on the Nile, and the Middle Stone Age would hold the best evidence for primitive livelihood and very early beliefs prior to the centers of the Nilo-Saharans and the Afro-Asiatics. And here we can see Gadamoto, Ethiopia here, this blue in the center. So we see a continuous pattern if we move from Omo with Eve's the first L ancestry, and then we move to Gadamoto, Ethiopia, and then we move to Maiso and Koni, and then it just continues from there, right? That's kind of what the maps are showing us is happening, and that's what I wanted to show. So my previous videos would start in Kenya, southwestern Kenya, right? The very earliest human-like species and populations, and then we move north to Lake Turkana and Omo, and then the other group moves south to South Africa, where you have the San people and the Khoikhoi peoples, and then here north we have the Omo people, and then we're moving into the Ethiopian people, right? And then only thing we're missing is the people who are on the White Nile, and I'm gonna tackle that next. So then we have both sides. We have the Ethiopian, and then we have the Sudan, the Nilo-Saharan people, which we're gonna show are on the White Nile. All right, thank you for watching. Here's the bibliography. We have an African American paternal lineage adds an extremely ancient root to the human Y chromosome phylogenetic tree. And then we have James Harrod's the 200-year evolution of Homo sapiens sapiens, language and myth families based on mitochondria DNA. And then we have Christopher Ehret, the civilizations of Africa. And then we have J.W. Rutherford's the English-speaking Mebos of Cameroon. And that's the end of this presentation. Thanks for watching. I'm Stephen Webb Jr. from San Diego, California. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.